Hello and welcome to this edition of Proficio Cyber Chats. Today we welcome to the chat Proficio CEO and co-founder Brad Taylor and Lee Waskevich, VP of Solutions for ePlus. We have some great topics lined up for our guests to discuss today, including how the threat landscape has evolved over the past few years, as well as the pain points companies are commonly seeing in today's environment, and a few suggestions on how they might find solutions with limited resources. Let's chat. How has the threat landscape evolved in recent years, and how does this impact security operation teams?
Yeah, well, the threat landscape is always evolving. We see new threats every day. We see all companies getting attacked, hundreds of times a day, and many have, low-level compromises that often will propagate into more incidents. With COVID, obviously, the biggest change is now we have millions and millions of new remote workers. So we've got millions of new VPN workers. We have millions of people working from home. We have, all those people looking at and using new remote applications that, once upon a time were from workstations that were, in the building are now remote laptops. Even the security operations centers have had to go through that change. What we saw, immediately, and we had to go through this process as a company ourselves, is moving people remote. We had to adopt to new virtual private networking, new policies, new procedures, new ways of securing those remote laptops that were now on home networks, new ways of getting back in through our communication channels in a secure fashion. And so what we had to do was we had to spin up the capability of doing additional monitoring for all of our customers. And we saw a enormous, probably in about March, I'd say we had 35% overall increase in attacks, almost all targeted towards remote workers. But there's been a lot of attacks remotely. We see a lot of tick up in ransomware. So a lot of companies have had to add that next generation endpoint protection platform, add new remote VPN capabilities, and start to look at a deeper level of understanding of what that remote workforce meant and how they were getting attacked. So Lee, what have you seen, in your customer base out there as well?
Yeah, no, great points, Brad. From our standpoints, looking at the threat landscape, we've seen just the evolution related around the complexity of attacks. So whether it was nation state attacks or cyber criminals, they were going after all organizations. So whether you're big or small, it really didn't matter. There was always a payday to be had around that, or there was always some sort of next motion involved as to where that attack was leading to ultimately, especially in the case of stealing things like intellectual property or secrets and such. So, we see a huge rise around just the exploitation of web applications becoming so pervasive, and especially now as companies are moving their applications into the cloud. Many times that migration from the physical data center into a cloud-based service or refactoring that application, the security controls and frameworks that were along that on the internal enterprise did not follow into the cloud. The upkeep around software, there was just a whole new stack that had to be learned, and the developers and the operations teams had to understand what security controls were imperative. Likewise, the user being the weakest link many times, so phishing expeditions and other types of social engineering to steal users' credentials, or to pique their curiosity to click on something they're not supposed to click on, which could then seed ransomware or other types of attacks into the environment. We saw a huge rise in that. We also worked with customers that were dealing with performance challenges when it came to technologies like VPN. So where historically they may have been able to, for a subset of workers, be able to fully tunnel that traffic, it was just overwhelming to both the bandwidth or perhaps the VPN gateways that were in place. So now you see them having to make decisions to allow and provide for business operations, but sacrifice some of the native security that was there. So by enabling things like split tunneling, they're able to increase the performance to their corporate applications. But now these endpoints were left to go off to public internet or SaaS-based services without a means of inspection. And that, again, provides a new threat vector that they hadn't had to deal with before. And it led to an increase in the need for the rise in visibility on those endpoints and being able to see and look at and control where those users were able to go. So I think from a security operations standpoint, whether they were doing it internally, having to then, again, look at these new traffic patterns, or whether they were working with a managed service provider such as yourself, being able to work more closely together to understand what that new architecture or what that new form of business operations looked like, so that security could, as quickly as possible, pivot and reset so that they can start detecting anomalies when they happen and be able to detect and mitigate those faster.
Yeah, I completely agree. And we've seen, some of the same similar things. So, the focus almost now more so than it was pre-COVID is increase your efficiencies and decrease your cost, to maintain, your business standards. And so the evolution to the cloud has always been an increase in efficiencies and decrease in costs. So companies have accelerated that, and that's created a whole new dynamic of security as well. Plus, I think remote workers are going to be more acceptable now, and so that creates a new dynamic and more distributed applications, distributed people, cloud-based services. And so one of the things, as we relate back to the Security Operations Center and how to actually do detection in that environment, sometimes static use cases, where you're asking questions of the machine, are not good enough. And you have to start looking at many, many different data sources and create patterns of discovery, statistical anomalies, which is best suited for machine learning. So in the cloud environment, we notice that, when you have Kubernetes and things that are, elastic in their ability to spin up and spin down and do other things, that having a static monitoring use case sometimes isn't as effective as having something that can flow with that. Some type of artificial intelligence machine learning models we've seen are the only way to actually be able to monitor those environments. So, the SOC has changed. I think a lot of other companies have changed, and we're continuing to adapt to this new environment. And I think it's going to, for the most part, a lot of it's going to stick around, even after, we have a vaccine and the pandemic starts to ease.
Yeah, I think it's a lot too. Like you mentioned, it's dynamic in nature. So as people moving to lockdown, moving out of it, and talking to CIOs and others that are leading IT teams within organizations, we see them making sure that they're prepared for any next that's coming. So they're not sure exactly, the timeframes around opening up, or if once we'll open up, if things will go back to the way they were from a lockdown perspective. So making sure that they're providing their workforce with the tools that they need to be productive in their jobs, the safety that they require to feel safe, from a human standpoint, and then from a cyber standpoint, employing technologies that, users in the past may have seen as a bit cumbersome are now being looked at as something that has to happen. Things like multi-factor authentication, things like endpoint security software, and the different ways that they have to go about connecting to their applications now becomes table stakes, and users are more apt to start to leverage those. I think from an operations provider, it's key that as companies look to consume more SaaS applications, and the fact that their data is so disparate, being able to ingest the log data and the event data from many different spots, whether it's log-based, API-based, helps operations teams to get that fuller picture as to what the customer is dealing with when it comes to threats, and therefore, as you mentioned, leverage more dynamic learning through machine learning and those types that you do at Proficio, and then be able to use that to reduce the time to detection.
How can companies address the lack of trained cybersecurity professionals that we see today?
I think there's a number of different ways that companies can go about doing this. Number one is to, I think, first and foremost, take stock in the cybersecurity program that they have. So as advisors and consultants to our clients, we help them understand that an alignment to a security framework and having a plan is key. Too many times we walk into organizations where the security architecture has just grown organically over years and years, and people are running around putting out fires and chasing their tails a lot of times for the alerts and events and things that are raised from those technologies. But if we can help companies to understand what their risk profile looks like and develop a clear plan around that, then a lot of those expectations, are able to be clearly documented, and we're able to help train people that we may have on staff to operate what's there. And then when companies are searching for new talent, they're able to clearly articulate exactly what they need in that regard, and they're able many times to pull people that are either in like an adjacent or a complementary side of IT over into security, or they're able to train more junior staff and those coming into IT and quickly get them on board with how the security program that the company operates and how to make sense and how to play a part within that role or within that program. So, we see companies that are, once they have a clear understanding of the framework they're going after, being able to consolidate a lot of the security technologies, leveraging less vendors to provide the same amount of abilities. We see them training up staff accordingly, and then reaching out where they know they can't fill those gaps. And this is where, partnerships for professional services like ePlus provides, or managed services like Proficio provides, to help augment those teams in providing a robust general coverage across the security continuum. So they'll be experts in a few areas, and those are the pieces they can skill up and consolidate technologies around, but then recognizing that there's places that they're going to need help, and then relying on those partnerships in order to meet those challenges. I think from a training standpoint, on-the-job training and experience is worth many times more than what's out there from a book perspective. So we help companies to do tabletop exercises and other types of activities to hone their skills. So that way the training and the muscle memory develops, so that as incidents take place and as security operations, whether it's reconnaissance and triage and all the things that go along with detecting threats, that companies are ready to handle those types of events, and that they're able to quickly remediate those and bring the business back to the level at which it was. I don't know, Brad, from your side, I mean, you guys have a robust amount of talent within the operations center there. How are you handling skills?
Yeah, great question. So, first I want to say I completely agree with everything you said regarding now is a great time, and it's always a great time, but it's really important to understand where your security program is, what your security posture is, and really have it well defined, and also to follow some type of framework. From a perspective of Proficio coming in to help companies do that managed detection and response, we work with companies that are in all different phases of that life cycle, if you will, and for us to follow in, behind an ePlus and with an ePlus, where you're working with a company to establish those security programs and have them, defined and implemented and in place or in action, as well as, working towards a framework model, it's so much easier for us to layer into that, provide that security operations center services. But back to your question, so there is absolutely still a skills gap in cybersecurity professionals globally. There's somewhere between 1 million and 2 million still openings, even in this environment for cybersecurity professionals, and they're just not out there. So one of the things we have to look at as we acquire talent, and luckily we're one of those companies that has still continued to hire through this current environment. So we're still growing and bringing on new people, and a lot of times we bring in people and then we provide mentorship, and the mentorships have always been personal and face-to-face and in team and group meetings. And so now we've had to adapt to this remote environment, and as you mentioned, we use a lot of online training classes now, whereas before we would go to the classrooms. Now we've converted to that online training, as a lot of our kids are doing the same thing out in the public schools and universities. So it's worked out pretty well. Once you kind of get the flow to it, it works out well, as long as you can come back into these collaborative conference meetings and ask questions of your peers and go through those case studies. It's been pretty efficient for us, and we can actually get through more material faster than in a classroom where I think we have more questions, people raising their hands a lot. So I think it's been good for us. The other things that we've been able to do is, if you can't add more people at the rate that you want, because they may not just be available, you've got to start to automate. And so there's been a lot of good transitions and automation over the last 2 or 3 years available to companies in security operations. So one is providing the ability to do detection. You want to do detection with static use cases, and now moving to machine learning models, and map those, as you mentioned, to another framework like the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So understanding what are the known threat vectors, and do you have the ability to detect in those. So understanding your gaps, filling those gaps, gives you that greater capability of doing detection, so that you're not just chasing things down that are false. So you want to make sure that you have accuracy in your detection, and that you're not wasting time and resources. So that's one clear thing, is you don't have to have as many people if you're better off at automating and managing that detection. The other thing is, with the security orchestration and automated response technologies, or what's called SOAR, that's providing a lot of capabilities of getting faster detection with less resources, and then automating some of those response actions, predominantly the containment actions. What we found even years ago, as we started to develop this capability, was if you're really good at threat detection and really good at providing the escalated alerts within the business context, so a company knew that it was a finance server that had command and control attack and compromise, as opposed to the receptionist PC with adware, two different priorities. They knew that if it was the first, they had the responsibility of containing that threat by blocking an attacker to an IP address someplace and maybe quarantining, some ports on that device. If you can automate that, it's much, much better than trying to go through a change management process that could take hours and days. And so we started to create that automated response capability more as a SOAR as a service, years ago. And that has really, really expanded over the last 6 months, where companies are saying, hey, I've got less resources to do the response. How do I automate? And we work with them towards that automation, or we work with them on, tools that they want to acquire and use within their environment, like a Phantom or a Demisto or, other types of products. The other thing that I think helps out is, you don't always want to buy new products. You want to automate and you want to, use the products that you have. And so working with a professional services team like ePlus to go in and do a check. Do you have the proper gaps covered within your environment? Like you mentioned, web applications. We see a lot of companies have just left that in the back burner, and now it's back on front because it's being attacked. Do you have the right application set for web application firewalls, and is your IDS tuned properly? Are you architected correctly? So having somebody come in and double check that will help you quite a bit in not going through the cycles of making mistakes over and over again. Having somebody like ePlus come in and actually do some of the work to manage some of those things, we've seen be very, very effective. Sometimes it's, let's get going for the first year and then a company can take it over. But, using the experts that are in certain areas to be able to provide those services, I think gives you a quicker path to, lowering your total cost of ownership. Again, automation for efficiency, reducing the cost, is a model that helps you to fill that cybersecurity skills gap in many cases.
What are the pain points we commonly see in companies in today's environment, and how do you suggest they find solutions with limited resources?
I think the common pain points are companies still have an enormous number of attacks that are happening every single day. The attacks are becoming more sophisticated. It's not just companies or attackers looking for monetary gain. We now have, more and more nation states looking for, things like, research on COVID, research on, other types of medical plans or medical solutions. They're attacking pharmaceutical companies. We see, attacks occurring at all types of different organizations with ransomware. We're now seeing a lot of extortion style attacks, where not only do I lock your data up, but now I have your data, I'm going to release your data unless I get paid, some type of extortion fees. And so there's a lot of new types of attacks are occurring for a lot of different reasons, and companies are becoming overwhelmed, with these attacks. So it hasn't slowed down a bit. It's actually increased, over, the last few months, and it's continuing to increase, year over year. So I think, common challenges, just the volume and sophistication of the attacks. I think that one of the things that we see companies trying to do is, understand, one, what is my gap in my security posture, and what are my, challenges in my vulnerabilities at the highest risk. And so some of the things that we've worked on companies to solve is, not only just scan my network for vulnerabilities, but understand out of the 10,000 vulnerabilities that I have, what are the 100 or what are the 10 that are highest risk? Is there an exploit for a vulnerability? Is a resource exposed to the internet? Is it a vulnerability on my funds transfer application server as opposed to, the janitor's PC someplace? So understanding the highest risk and focusing on those helps companies to, shrink up that threat vector and basically give them the ability to, minimize, if you will, some level of the attack surface that they have.
Yeah, I think from our side, looking at it, in more of the consultancy realm and the professional services side, I think it's just a matter of being overwhelmed, right? So no company's going to raise their hand and say, yeah, I'm okay being breached, right? Or I'm okay dealing with the ransomware attack. No one wants to be on that page of the news. No one wants to have to deal with that internally. But when you look at, as we described earlier, a lot of the types of attacks, and you just mentioned a few, relating to ransomware, extortion, encryption, intellectual property theft, all of those. And then you look at the market that's out there to protect you and the buzzwords and everything that goes along with it. RSA conference was one of the last ones that actually went off this year before COVID, and just the thousands of vendors that were there, all peddling things from zero trust to SASE to SOAR, advanced threats, and all the other buzzwords that come along with it. Our customers see a lot of pain in just trying to make sense of it all, and what is exactly what they need to stop and to address the risk that they have. You mentioned the pieces around vulnerability management. I just read this week around, they're expecting 20,000 CVEs this year when it comes to known vulnerabilities, a significant increase over last year. So how, again, do you cut through that noise to find out and prioritize what's important? And then how do you leverage the ecosystem or the architecture that you have there to be able to detect against threats? So much of that comes down to being able to understand what outcome that you're seeking. So many times customers are they're smitten by the latest and greatest technology. They like the new shiny and automated piece, but what value is that going to bring? At the end of the day, what outcome are you solving for? Are you trying to stop disruptive threats? Are you trying to reduce your attack surface? Are you trying to secure your cloud, right? And understanding at the highest level what they're trying to accomplish, looking at it from a skills and aptitudes perspective. Again, we talked about the cyber skills gap. So what do we have the ability to do in-house, and where do we know that we're going to have to seek out and work with a clear partner and understand the value that that partner brings? And then how do we pull that together and provide metrics around measuring how effective our security program is? If you can get all those different pieces, it really helps a customer feel more confident and secure in their security program. And that's really part of what we strive to do. I know that's what Proficio strives to do as well. And getting over that last hurdle of realizing that it's okay to partner. We can't be experts in everything. There's not somebody, many times even from a reseller standpoint, we try and help people understand the umbrella of security and all the different point solutions that come underneath that. You're not going to have experts in everything. So how do we make sure that, again, we identify clearly what we know we can do, and what we want to do to mitigate our risk going forward, and then how do we find and select and get that value out of a services partner, whether it's someone that can help advise on your program, whether it's someone that can help you, configure and integrate, or it's someone that can help you, operate and quickly detect when something's wrong.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, one of the other challenges we can go back to that we talked about before was the migration to cloud. So many companies are migrating to cloud, and I can't emphasize enough the importance of getting a consultant, someone like an ePlus and your team to come in and help companies to design what is their security architecture that's going to be required when they go into the cloud. What are the security controls, what's available within the cloud environment or environments that they've selected, how can they supplement that? And then also go down to the application level, because that's where we see there's just a full stop with many organizations. The applications are being moved from one environment to another environment, and quite often it's the same old model. The last thing we thought about was how do we secure the applications.
Yeah, and the last thing I wanted to point out just around solutions with limited resources. Most of the solutions out there today have a lot of feature and functionality to them and not being fully utilized. So taking stock into the investments you've already made, and there's tons of things out there. A lot of times, many times, open source or things that are out leveraging GitHub and others to take advantage of those APIs and automate the security that, as we mentioned earlier, that you have. But there are ways to configure security defenses and that can provide exponentially increased value over how it's being used today. And all it's really going to take is a little bit of research and time, and perhaps partnering up with some people that can help you make sense of it and implement it. But it definitely beats going out and trying to overhaul or buy just another widget that's going to perform a single function.
Yeah, totally agree. The security providers out there, the product solution providers, have really been doing a great job in enhancing and upgrading their security solutions, providing more capability all the way from the endpoint, to the core, to the cloud, and at the perimeter. And, make sure that you're going back to the vendors and, going back to your partner, that provided you those solutions, and having them help you to look at what's available with the products that you already have, and upgrade and start to utilize some of those new capabilities and services. So, it's much better than going out and trying to find a new, solution set to fill a gap when you already have it available in the solution that you have.
We would like to thank Brad Taylor and Lee Waskevich again for joining us on this episode. If you have any questions or comments regarding any of the topics discussed today, please feel free to reach out to us at Proficio.com. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope you tune in to the next episode of Proficio Cyber Chats.